military has now taken control of the country for 1 year.
It says that it's likely to miss by around.
What was happening inside the virology lab in Wuhan?
One ship was able to freeze global trade.
We want love, we want peace, we want equality!
There are
a traditional recipe, and it's really very delicious.
Vielleicht nur als Imposant.
Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. We begin once again with Afghanistan, a country hurtling from one war to another. Some new videos have emerged. They show the Taliban shooting down Afghan commandos. They also show the Taliban striking helicopters of the Afghan Air Force. The Taliban today declared that they don't want to fight inside Afghanistan cities. But that's hardly reassuring given what they are doing at the moment. The violence and attacks have triggered an exodus. The Afghan government blames Pakistan for supporting the Taliban. It's no secret that they do. But this Taliban may not do Pakistan's bidding. It is setting its own terms, telling Turkey, for instance, to leave Afghanistan or be treated as an occupying force, controlling border areas to force neighboring countries to negotiate with them. America legitimized the Taliban in the Doha talks, and now there's no stopping the terrorists who want the power of a ruling party, but none of the responsibility that comes with it. Meanwhile, in Tajikistan, the Foreign Minister of India will come face-to-face with his counterparts from Pakistan and China. We're waiting to see what happens there at the SCO meeting, the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Also on the show tonight, China's new claim to space fame. Dumps of human waste left behind by Chinese ships in the South China Sea are now visible from space. Another rap on the knuckles of big tech. France has fined Google a record $593 million for violating copyright of news websites. Do vaccine cocktails help? The WHO advises against it, but countries follow their own rules. Thailand is the latest one, switching from a Chinese jab to AstraZeneca. And the government of Iran has approved what it calls an Islamic dating app. We'll tell you all about it. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
At least 45 people have been killed and more than 750 arrested as looting and rioting continue in South Africa after the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma. Political chaos continues to grip even as the president appointed Sher Bahadur Deuba as the country's new prime minister. Doubts remain over whether the prime minister will survive the trust vote, which is to be held within a month. As Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray continues to be on the boil, rebel leaders on Monday said that they have launched a new offensive in the conflict-torn northern region against the federal troops. The UN Rights Council has expressed deep concern over abuses in Tigray. Iran has confirmed prisoner swap negotiations with the US. Robert Malley, the US envoy for Iran, said President Biden has insisted on release of all Americans detained in Iran, terming any partial deal unacceptable. A record number of people in France booked vaccination appointments on Monday night after French President Emmanuel Macron announced measures designed to push more and more people to get inoculated, even those who have been skeptical. Over 60 people were killed and several others injured after a massive fire engulfed the coronavirus isolation ward of an Iraqi hospital in the southern city of Nasiriyah. A hotel collapse in China's Suzhou city killed 8 people as rescue workers raced to search for people buried under the rubble. The cause of the collapse is still under investigation. Thousands of fish were dropped from a plane into lakes near Bicknell in Utah, United States, to repopulate them with marine life. Up to 35,000 young fish called fingerlings can be released in a single aerial drop. Their smaller size, combined with the fall from high altitude, results in high survival rate. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has urged India's Olympic hopefuls not to be bogged down by the pressure of expectations and just focus on giving their best at the Tokyo Games, starting later this month. India will be represented by a record 126 athletes across 18 sporting disciplines, and they all took part in an interactive session today in which the Prime Minister inquired about their preparations and wished them the best of luck. 5 players of the champion Italy side have been named in the official Euro 2020 team of the tournament. Goalkeeper Gianluigi Donnarumma is joined by defenders Leonardo Bonucci and Leonardo Spinazzola, midfielder Jorginho and forward Federico Chiesa. Runners-up England were represented by Harry Maguire, Kyle Walker and Raheem Sterling, while Belgium striker Romelu Lukaku and midfielders Pierre-Emil Højbjerg of Denmark and Pedri of Spain completed the lineup.
This is a true story. It's also quite disturbing. Afghan troops shot dead in cold blood by the Taliban, 22 of them. They fought for 2 hours. Then they ran out of ammunition. They were cornered, so they decided to surrender. These 22 Afghan security men walked out of a building. Like I said, they wanted to surrender, but they were shot to death by the Taliban on the spot. This happened on the 16th of June in the Faryab province, close to Afghanistan's border with Turkmenistan. Videos have now emerged, and I want to warn all our viewers, these are disturbing images. Viewer discretion is strongly recommended.
Allah Akbar!
There are other videos of the same attack that are floating around on the internet. We decided to not broadcast them. They're too graphic. The idea is not to show violence and blood. The idea is to underline what the Taliban are doing after the US gave them an upper hand in the sham peace talks. Reports say all 22 Afghan commandos were shot in cold blood. They were out of ammunition and surrounded by the Taliban. They had no air support. The Taliban said custody, but that's a lie. The Afghan Ministry of Defense has confirmed that the commandos were killed on the spot. Human rights groups say the Taliban has committed a war crime. We say it's the understatement of the year. In any case, the Taliban are not waiting for a certificate of merit from human rights groups. They're having a free run while the world is busy expressing concern. Look at what happened in the Kunduz province yesterday. The Taliban have released this video. They claim to have destroyed 2 Black Hawk helicopters of the Afghan Air Force. These pictures were shot by a drone. You can see a helicopter burning in the distance. Such attacks are becoming alarmingly frequent. They've triggered an exodus. Around 270,000 Afghans have been displaced this year. This year alone, 270,000. Civilian casualties have shot up by 29% since last year. Since the year 2001, the war has pushed more than 3.5 million people out of their homes. The American withdrawal was supposed to end the misery. It has only worsened it. The United Nations believes that Afghanistan is on the brink of a new humanitarian crisis. Refugee camps have already started coming up. These pictures are from outside the Mazar-e-Sharif city in the Balkh province. In the last 15 days, the Taliban's advances have driven out more than 5,600 families from their homes. Most of these displacements have happened in northern Afghanistan, where the Taliban has stepped up violent attacks. Reports say the Taliban now control some 100 border districts in northern Afghanistan, 100. They have a presence in virtually every corner of the country. In recent weeks, the Taliban has overrun dozens of districts in 8 strategic provinces. And these areas are important because they share a border with 6 neighbors of Afghanistan: Pakistan, China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan and Iran. Now, reports say the Taliban has taken control of trade routes, border crossings and major roads along the borders. This offensive is not just about controlling territory, it has strategic objectives too. By controlling Afghanistan's borders, the Taliban wants to gain more legitimacy. This situation forces Afghanistan's neighbors to deal with the Taliban. They don't want this conflict to spill into their borders. At the same time, they would like a safe passage through the checkpoint, so they will be compelled to cut deals with the Taliban, and that's what the Taliban wants. These circumstances only weaken the authority of the civilian government further. Kabul's options are shrinking, frankly. It is still hoping for a solution through talks. Today, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai said the stalled peace talks will resume soon.
God willing, very soon you will witness the restart of serious peace talks. You just have to be patient, think wisely and move towards peace. My advice to both parties is to stop fighting. Especially my advice to the Taliban is to stop fighting. With capturing districts, you are not going to reach anywhere. Therefore, join your people peacefully.
Well, talking is the ideal option, but you need 2 willing parties for that. The Taliban is in no mood to talk peace. The brutal execution of Afghan commandos is proof of that. The American withdrawal has emboldened the Taliban, and now Pakistan's steady support is strengthening their resolve. The Vice President of Afghanistan has said that Taliban forces are being directed by Pakistan's special commands in Peshawar and Quetta. This revelation comes at a crucial time. There's a summit about to take place in Tajikistan, a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO's foreign ministers. The agenda of this meeting is to review the worsening security situation in Afghanistan. Part of this review meet will be the foreign ministers of China and Pakistan. They will both try to assert their country's interest in playing peacemaker. It's going to be quite a showdown, because sitting across the table will be the foreign minister of India. We'll have to see what plays out there. He landed in Dushanbe this evening, the Indian foreign minister. He met his Afghan counterpart, Mohammad Hanif Atmar, on Wednesday. He'll be attending a roundtable with his counterparts from all SCO member nations. As the countdown to that big meeting begins, the Taliban has issued a warning to Turkey, which happens to be a dialogue partner of the SCO. It has warned Turkey against extending its presence in Afghanistan. So what we have now is a revelation, a high-level meeting and an unusual warning. Our next report gets you the details.
Pakistan and Taliban. The rhyme may be a cruel coincidence, but their actions are definitely not. The terror state and the terror outfit have a history of harvesting chaos. It was Pakistan that gave birth to the Taliban. And it is Pakistan that is helping Taliban come back to power. We are not saying this. The government of Afghanistan is. This is Amrullah Saleh, the first Vice President of Afghanistan. This is what he says. The enemy's power is divided into three parts from the constructive vision. The first part is the trained forces that are directed by Pakistan's special strings and corps from Peshawar, Quetta and other parts. The Afghan Vice President is not alone. Pakistani lawmakers themselves are exposing their government's nefarious design.
कि हमारी रियासत को इतने ही ये लोग पसंद हैं, तो ये हमारी अपनी रियासत पे उनके हवाले क्यों नहीं करते? अगर इतनी हमें ये लोग पसंद हैं और वो हम इतना उनको ग्लोरीफाई करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि भाई वो इतने अच्छे लोग हैं, वो तो इतने ज़हीन लोग हैं, जिस तरह हमारे वजीर खारजा साहब के स्टेटमेंट है, तो ये हमारी अपनी हुकूमत पे उनके हवाले कर दे. बहुत ही अच्छे लोग हैं, बहुत ही ज़हीन लोग हैं.
What was mere suspicion is now a matter of record. Islamabad has been called out at the highest levels of the Afghan government and in its own parliament. And yet, Pakistan is being regarded as a stakeholder in the Afghan peace process. This is what's happening at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. A foreign ministers' meeting is being held in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. What for? To review the worsening security situation in Afghanistan. It's bad enough that Pakistan is part of the process. Worse still, China, a leading member of the SCO, wants to serve as a mediator for regional security on the Afghan issue. Yes, the biggest quarreller in the world is looking to mediate. According to the Global Times, the SCO believes that China can play the role of a responsible power and regional stabilizer. What about India, which has been a major stakeholder in the peace and stability of Afghanistan? Well, India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has also landed in Dushanbe. He is there on the invitation of his Tajik counterpart. He will be meeting the SCO contact group on Afghanistan and hold bilateral talks with foreign ministers of other participating nations. But there is no official word any bilateral or pull aside with Pakistan and China. Back in Afghanistan, the Taliban has issued a warning aimed at Turkey. It has warned Turkey against extending its presence in the country. With the withdrawal of American forces, Turkey has offered to guard the Kabul airport. The security of the airport is crucial for the operation of diplomatic missions. So Ankara proposed that its troops secure the airport. But the Taliban have turned down this proposal, saying the decision is ill-advised, a violation of our sovereignty and territorial integrity, along with our national interest. We consider the presence of foreign forces in our homeland by any country under whatever pretext as occupation. These developments are crucial. Not only do they tell us about the tensions that will prevail in the days to come, they also reveal the extent of the chaos that America's withdrawal from Afghanistan has led to. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's not forget why Afghanistan is in a mess. Because of a superpower and its savior complex. For the United States, invasions are a pastime. They arrive all guns blazing. They make a meal of the situation and then cut and run. They did that in Vietnam, in Iraq, and now in Afghanistan. The fact is, the American war machine is sloppy. It is violent, pompous, and also very expensive. Thankfully for America, they have money to spare. That's how they sustain these destabilizing adventures, by burying blunders under piles of dollars. During a war, nobody is looking. All the focus is on winning the war. But now that America is leaving, it is time for a dissection. What did the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan cost America? Now remember, 20 years is a long time. That's a lot of guns, a lot of bullets. And this is the final bill. Total expenses, $2.26 trillion. That's how much America has spent since 2001 in Afghanistan. This is military spending plus development projects, $2.26 trillion, almost the entire GDP of Africa. Out of this, more than $800 billion is military spending. The aircraft, Humvees, tanks, ammunition. All of this costs money, of course. That's one part of the bill. Part two is development costs, what America conveniently calls nation building, although no one asked them to build nations. On this nation building, they have spent nearly $143 billion, $36 billion on dams and roads, more than $4 billion on humanitarian aid, $9 billion tackling narcotics. Even over 2 decades, this is a lot of money, and what does America have to show for it? A nation descending into civil war. Even the finances don't check out. Americans have always been notorious war profiteers, and until now they paid for their own wars. But Afghanistan was different. Let me explain. During the Korean War in 1950, tax rates were up 92%. During the Vietnam War, they were raised by 77%. Both times, America raised funds by taxing their rich. Now look at Afghanistan. When the war began, George Bush actually slashed taxes by 8%. It was part of his trickle-down theory. So how did Washington pay for this insanely expensive campaign? By borrowing. The US had 2 big military operations in this century, Iraq and Afghanistan, and for these 2 wars, America borrowed nearly $2 trillion. And with loans, we know, comes interest. They have paid nearly $530 billion in interest, $530 billion. So the war may have ended, but the expenses have not. Next comes the human cost of the war. More than 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, along with 3,000 plus military contractors. As for the survivors, they will need lifelong medical support. That's another $1.6 trillion. Now, don't get us wrong. This is America's money, their loans. They can spend it any way they like. But when you're in the business of invading and occupying, you must see the mission through. And that's where Washington has failed yet again. They lit the fuse and bolted from the room. They spent billions upgrading Afghan infrastructure only to leave it on a platter for the Taliban. Does America admit its failure? Not even close. Joe Biden says the US has achieved its goals in Afghanistan, not a first for an American president. In 2003, George Bush declared victory in Iraq. He spoke to his troops with a mission accomplished banner hanging behind him. 18 years later, US troops are still lumbering in Iraq. You see, the Americans don't lose. They just confidently deny failure. And who pays for these failures? Not the US. Countries are left to fend for themselves. Like right now, the Taliban is sweeping across Afghanistan. What is the US doing about it? No air support, no warnings. They're busy organizing symbolic military ceremonies. Like I said, pompous but sloppy. America's midnight dash will cost Afghanistan dearly. Let me tell you what's at stake. 2.6 million Afghans have fled the country. Any hope of their return has been quashed. Nearly 40% of Afghan girls attend school today. When the Taliban ruled, it was 0%. Reports say those old diktats are returning. Afghanistan is being dragged to the dark ages. On a truck driven by the Taliban, on a highway paved by the Americans. There is a gaping power vacuum in the region right now. Pakistan has dropped any pretense of shadow support. They're openly backing the Taliban. For China, a new frontier has opened up, a chance to firm up its plans for the Belt and Road Initiative. And within Afghanistan, there is violence and fear. Who will take responsibility for this mistake? America should, but they won't. They have packed up the circus and moved to the next town. Perhaps another nation for them to save. Perhaps after 20 years, we'll have another $1 trillion bill and nothing to show for it. In 2016, the Philippines won a landmark legal victory over China, one that could have ended China's aggression in the South China Sea for good. But 5 years after that victory, China has continued to expand its presence in the disputed waters. The United States wants to contain China's aggression, but the Philippines seems confused about what it should do. Take on the dragon or sit back and hope for the best. In July 2016, an international tribunal delivered a major blow to China. It found that there is no legal basis for China's claims on the South China Sea. The tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines, but Beijing refused to accept the verdict. Instead, it moved to militarize the disputed islands, a move that has raised tensions and increased the possibility of a military flare-up. On Monday, China claimed that it had driven away an American warship. The PLA said the USS Benfold entered the disputed waters near the Paracel Islands. The US has termed China's claims as false. It says the American ship's movement was consistent with international law. The US Navy made a planned move. It wanted to assert its freedom to move around the Paracel Islands, so it sent a ship to exercise the right of passage. The Paracels, by the way, are among the hundreds of disputed islands in the South China Sea. A total of 6 players are fighting for control over this region. It's a region that is rich in resources. China claims almost the entire South China Sea. Vietnam, Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia and Brunei are the other 5 players who have competing and sometimes overlapping claims. So even a small dispute here has the potential to escalate into a full-blown conflict. And this is where America comes in. The United States wants to play the role of a shield. It wants to help the smaller players defend themselves against the Chinese aggression. Over the weekend, the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to the Philippines. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that America will come to the defense of the Philippine forces if they're attacked by the Chinese in the South China Sea. But is America backing a reluctant partner in this fight against China? Duterte rose to power by promising a hard stance against China. In fact, when he was campaigning to become president, Duterte promised to ride a jet ski in the South China Sea just to personally stake claim of the Philippines. But after he became president, he made a U-turn. He said the jet ski remark was a joke and only stupid people should believe it, his words. 1 year later, the Philippine president was singing praises of Beijing. In 2017, he spoke about how both sides had managed to turn around their relationship.
I am pleased to note the positive turnaround and vigorous momentum of Philippines-China relations. Mutual trust and confidence building have led to increased interaction on many levels of our two governments.
Duterte is known for his combative brand of politics. But he has hesitated to use the same tone on China. Even when the Chinese tried to intimidate the Philippine Coast Guard earlier this year, hundreds of ships from the Chinese maritime militia anchored near a reef claimed by the Philippines. Filipinos wanted their government to stand up to the dragon. The country's foreign minister even resorted to some colorful language to ask the Chinese ships to leave. But how did the president respond? He issued a gag order. In the month of May, President Duterte asked his ministers to not say anything about the South China Sea in public. Well, maybe he should listen to the voices of his own citizens. In July last year, a poll found that 70% of Filipinos want the government to assert its claim in the South China Sea. That anger was visible on the streets of Manila on Monday. Activists were seen protesting outside the Chinese embassy. They held anti-China placards and demanded that Beijing should honor the verdict by the International Tribunal 5 years ago. The pressure is now on Duterte. By ignoring these voices in his country, the president is not only putting his own political career at risk, he's also allowing China to accelerate its military activities in the region. Meanwhile, China says that it has the world's largest 5G mobile network. It also says it has the world's largest car market, the biggest market of computers, of television, mobile phones, electronics. It's a long list. The achievements that China's PR machinery proudly lists time and again. But here's something that they never tell you. China doesn't have enough space to flush its waste. So it is dumping catastrophic levels of human waste into the South China Sea, into waters that it doesn't even control. What's worse, the dumping levels are so high and intense that the waste has formed clusters. It can be seen from space. You have to see this to believe it.
These satellite images have been released by Singularity, an American geospatial firm. They show how human waste released from Chinese ships has accumulated in clusters in the South China Sea. The first image shows you the ships. The second one shows you the unsavory waste they leave behind. These images are from the Tetley Reef region, some 1,300 kilometers away from Chinese coasts. And there are more. Look at these images. They're from the Johnson South Reef. Again, the first image shows you Chinese ships. The second one, a word that rhymes. And these are not the only two reefs China is polluting with human waste. Look at this image now. It shows dumping vessels from China, stationed all across the Union Banks, which are part of the larger Spratly Islands. Chinese ships are present near the Collins Reef, the Hughes Reef, and the Ross Reef. This is not old data. All three sets of images are from June 2021. They show the incalculable damage China is causing, and that too to marine areas it doesn't even control. According to Liz Durr, the CEO of Singularity, the hundreds of ships that are anchored there are dumping raw sewage every day onto the reefs they are occupying. When the ships don't move, the waste piles up. This is a catastrophe of epic proportions, and we are close to the point of no return. This needs to stop immediately. There is merit in this warning, because these reefs feed the inhabitants of the entire South China Sea region. The following chronology tells you how. The larvae for the fish that inhabit South China Sea come largely from coral reefs. Spratly Islands are home to the biggest coral reefs in the entire region. By monsoon, the larvae settled along these islands gets distributed all over the sea. They become food for fish, that in return become fishery stocks for nations situated around the South China Sea and end up on the plates of their citizens. This includes the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. What does this tell you? That this is not a problem for one nation or one economic zone. This is a health catastrophe that is impacting several nations. What will it take to end it? Convincing China to flush its waste on its own land. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Europe specializes in erasing history. They wiggle away from accountability all the time, whether it's colonial reparations or racism. This dodginess extends to climate action as well. They blame India and China for global warming. But what about their own industrialization, their own emissions? Europe prefers to not talk about that. They say things are much better today, that Europe is leading the 21st century climate battle. Turns out, it is just another lie. Let me show you some pictures. These are from Europe's gas plants, some of the biggest on the continent. From outside, everything looks normal. No plumes of smoke, no leaks, everything seems to be in order. Now we're going to swap cameras. We're going from normal to infrared. Do you see the difference? Do you notice the steady stream leaking from the pipes? This is methane, the second biggest cause of global warming. You can't see it with your naked eyes because methane is colorless. But these infrared cameras can catch it. A climate watchdog went around Europe with these cameras. They inspected more than 200 plants. Guess what they found? Methane was leaking at 123 oil and gas sites. They're all over Europe. In Austria, Germany, Italy, Hungary, Poland, some of the self-proclaimed champions of Earth. Why is there no action against these gas plants? Because technically, there is nothing illegal about it. The European Union does not have laws curbing emission of methane. So these companies are not breaking any law. They're going by the book. It's a classic case of governments ignoring outdated laws because these leaks are completely preventable. Let me tell you how with a crash course on methane. It reaches our atmosphere in two ways, through leaking and venting. Leaks are pretty self-explanatory, but venting is slightly more complicated. When crude oil and coal are extracted, a few unwanted gases are produced. Methane is one of them. What do companies do with these gases? They release them into the atmosphere. That's called venting. Scientists say this is avoidable. Existing technology can be used to cut down emission at the source.
There is a lot of methane coming out. If this is confirmed, this methane can be recovered and used. I mean, everybody here uses methane. There is an industrial area here using a lot of methane. Why we have to put it in the sky and contribute to the destruction of our climate? So there must be more rational ways in year 2021 to use methane instead of venting in the atmosphere.
Does Europe have this technology? Of course it does. Then why are gas plants still releasing methane? For a bloc that has laws on bendy bananas and the color of your cheese, this is criminal negligence. The European Union realizes this. In fact, they are now drawing up new rules on methane leaks and venting. But don't expect quick results. These rules will go through the infamous EU bureaucracy. Leaders will debate, argue and blame each other. And all this time, methane will continue to leak. This is tragic news because methane is the most dangerous during its first 20 years in the atmosphere, almost 80% more potent than carbon dioxide. So methane is not a long-term threat. Its effects are more immediate than other greenhouse gases. And it's not just leaking in Europe. The entire developed world is guilty of this. In 2019, the New York Times used infrared cameras to capture methane leaks in the US. And there were similar pictures from Russia as well. These countries have flooded the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. But it's difficult to pin the blame because in the case of methane, there is literally no smoking gun. You need a camera worth $120,000 to see the leaks. So these countries act innocent and then peddle pictures of smoking factories in India and Brazil. As I said in the beginning, wiggling away from responsibility, the developed world never did stop polluting. They still churn out greenhouse gases, but their biggest trick was convincing the world to play along, to believe that Europe's chapter of pollution is behind them. In that sense, these methane leaks are almost poetic, an invisible gas to front a big lie. And we're not done with Europe. Keep your politics and your palate separate. That's a good piece of advice for every politician. People are very touchy about their food, borderline aggressive. So telling people what to eat can land you in trouble. But what if your palate is political? What if your eating habits impact government policy? One minister in Spain decided to talk about it. Alberto Garzón is the Consumer Affairs Minister of Spain. Last week, he went online with some culinary advice. Eat less meat, he said. Protect your planet.
What would you think if I told you that the consumption of excessive amounts of meat is damaging for our health and that of our planet? This question has motivated the need to make this video. I'm worried about the health of our citizens and I'm worried about the health of our planet.
You can guess what happened next. Spaniards dined on Garzón's comments. He got served on social media. His own cabinet colleagues disowned him, and 6 meat-producing associations wrote him a letter. Their message was straightforward: stay off our plates. When the backlash became unbearable, the minister tried to firefight. He said he wasn't proposing a ban, but a more measured consumption pattern, basically rationing our meat. And frankly, he has a point. Spanish regulators recommend eating up to 500 grams of meat a week. but the average Spaniard eats almost a kilogram, twice the recommended amount. This uncontrolled consumption has consequences. It directly affects the environment. Let me show you some numbers. Nearly 26% of global emissions come from the food industry. Out of this, 58% come from animal products, and half of it is just beef and lamb. So what's the link here? How does the meat industry affect our planet? It has to do with scale. The UK Greenpeace calls it industrial meat. You see, there's a big network between the farms and your table, and this network is dominated by corporates. Here's an example, JBS. It is the world's largest meat processing company based out of Brazil. They emit nearly half as much greenhouse gases as oil giants like Shell and BP. Meat production depends on deforestation. JBS, for example, is eating into the Amazon rainforests. For livestock to be reared, land must be reclaimed. And where does this land come from? Chopping and burning forests. So eating meat is not a culinary choice anymore. It is becoming a climate change policy. And it's not just meat. All dairy products have a similar impact on the planet. So experts want us to reduce meat and dairy consumption by 20%. This would save 7 million tons of carbon dioxide from farms. So the science checks out. But can we just wind up the meat industry overnight? No, we can't. It employs millions of people worldwide, sustains families, adds to the GDP. Not to mention, our food is linked to our culture and religion. So how do you balance this decision? For starters, you can never force this on someone. Instead, governments must look at incentives, ways to draw people away from meat. This could be higher taxes, even artificial substitutes. A few restaurants are already trying them out. Their creators swear by the taste. And don't forget the workers, the millions of people who work in this industry, the meat industry. They will need new jobs if the world walks away from meat. And that's the worry in Spain. The meat industry employs 2.5 million workers. Their exports are worth almost $10 billion. So Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is not swearing off meat just yet. In fact, he says a medium-cooked meat chop is unbeatable. Perhaps he's right. But survival trumps taste. Right now, our consumption patterns are over the top. We're spending way too much water, produce and fuel to fill up plates. And this is neither healthy nor sustainable. But the solution is not banning meat or making a vegan earth. The solution is rationing, treating meat as a food source, not as a pleasure to exploit. Think about it. And since we're talking about debates, here's another one. The debate over vaccine cocktails. Many countries have begun mixing and matching vaccines. They're administering people with 2 doses of separate Wuhan virus vaccines, meaning if your first dose is, say, an AstraZeneca, the second dose could be a Moderna or a Pfizer. The World Health Organization has warned against this. But some of the world leaders have already endorsed it and tried it on themselves. Among them is German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What's more, both these leaders have inoculated themselves, as I said, with vaccine cocktails. Does this mean that mix and match vaccines are safe? Our next report has the answer.
In Thailand, those who received a made-in-China vaccine as their first dose will now be given a second dose of AstraZeneca. In Canada, those who received the first dose of AstraZeneca will get a second dose of Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna. This is called heterologous vaccination, meaning inoculating a person with a combination of different vaccines. In this case, a combination of different Wuhan virus vaccines. This is the new vaccination trend, and it is being endorsed for reasons various and many. Studies have ruled in favor of vaccine cocktails. The first study was published on the 18th of May. It says heterologous vaccination regimen is highly immunogenic, meaning vaccine cocktails produce high immune response. An Oxford study on mix and match vaccines found that Pfizer-BioNTech and Oxford AstraZeneca generate strong immune response against Wuhan virus spike protein. This study was published in June 2021. Even before the month could end, German Chancellor Angela Merkel took a dose of AstraZeneca. Her first jab was a Moderna. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took a shot of Moderna. His first dose was an AstraZeneca. Experts in Canada said mRNA vaccines could be used interchangeably. In July, STIKO, or the German Standing Committee on Vaccination, recommended mixing AstraZeneca vaccines with a booster dose of either Pfizer or Moderna. Contributing to the rising interest in mix and match is failure of certain vaccines, or Chinese vaccines if you may. Thailand announced mixing vaccines after over 600 of its medical workers were found infected with the Wuhan virus. This even after 2 doses of China's Sinovac vaccine. At least 1 nurse died of the Wuhan virus despite taking the Chinese vaccine. Something similar is playing out in Indonesia. Frontline workers are testing positive despite vaccination with Sinovac. Made in China vaccines are proving to be as bad as made in China toys. Experts are also endorsing vaccine cocktails to neutralize the Delta variant. A booster shot of mRNA is being recommended for those inoculated with a single shot vaccine. Case in point, the Johnson & Johnson jab. There is no official recommendation from the CDC yet, and the World Health Organization is warning against vaccine cocktails.
It's a little bit of a dangerous trend here.
Why is it dangerous again?
There is limited data on mix and match. There are studies going on. We need to wait for that, and maybe it will be a very good approach. But at the moment, we only have data on the AZ vaccine, Oxford AstraZeneca, followed by Pfizer.
The data on mixing Pfizer and AstraZeneca is positive. But we have nothing when it comes to mixing AstraZeneca with a Chinese vaccine. The failure of Chinese jabs is making countries like Thailand desperate.
It will be a chaotic situation in countries if citizens start, deciding when and who they should be taking a second or a third or a fourth dose.
Israel has started administering a 3rd dose of Pfizer. Canada is unlikely to turn back on vaccine cocktails. The WHO's waning credibility means that countries take their own calls. Plus, Chinese vaccines are forcing countries to look for alternatives. Ask Thailand. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
What would you do if your government decides who you should be dating? If your government decides when and how you introduce your partner to your parents? What would you do if your state picks who you marry? I know this sounds bizarre, and this bizarre is playing out in Iran, also in some other countries, although more discreetly. Let's start with Iran. The country has redefined control by playing a matchmaker. Iran has unveiled a dating app, an Islamic dating app. It's called Hamdam, meaning companion. Hamdam is unlike any other dating app. You can't just sign up, swipe left and right and have a conversation and then go on a date. Iran's dating app requires you to take a psychology test. And once you find a match, the app steps in. It introduces the families. Not just that. Service consultants arrange and attend these meets. Wait, wasn't this supposed to be a dating app? Well, it was, and last we checked, dating was not the same as marriage. I mean, you can always date with the intention of getting married, but such relationships do not include introducing your parents even before you've met your date. Dating and marriage are not the same thing. But Iran does not understand this. Its birth rate has dropped 25% over the last 4 years, 25%, and the Islamic Republic is desperately looking for people it can marry off and expect babies from. Since normal dating apps do not come with such preconditions or expectations, Iran launched a state-sanctioned app exclusively designed by the state Islamic propaganda organization. The app claims to be for those who are, quote-unquote, seeking permanent marriage and a single spouse. Well, what about those who aren't? Those who aren't looking to jump into marriage even before getting to know a person. Can they continue using the more normal dating applications? The likes of Tinder and Bumble, they're quite popular in Iran, we are told. But Iran's cyberspace police chief, Colonel Ali Mohammad Rajabi, says all dating apps except Hamdam are illegal in Iran. Does this mean they'll all be banned soon? Well, we do not have confirmation on that yet. But by the looks of it, those looking for love online in Iran may soon have just 2 options. Sign up for Hamdam and get married, or stay single? Here's a question. What do you think happens when a state starts telling you who you should be dating? This question is sadly no longer hypothetical. States are already dictating your dating life. And I will show you what it looks like. In 2020, Pakistan banned Tinder. It also banned the LGBTQ dating app called Grindr. Why? Immoral/indecent content, said Pakistan. Earlier this year, the White House teamed up with dating apps. It encouraged the apps to give greater visibility to those who are vaccinated. How do you verify someone's Wuhan virus vaccination status on a dating application? Well, you can't. But here's what you can do. Manipulate a user's preference through algorithms. If a user is shown just a couple of hand-picked profile, he or she is likely to swipe right on at least one. Iran's Hamdam app aims to achieve this very end. The app claims to be using artificial intelligence to find matches and indirectly grow its population. In another continent, the US is discouraging you from dating those who are not vaccinated. This is a tinderbox situation. Countries are filtering the pool of people you can meet, you can date, maybe eventually you marry. By filtering who you meet, the state is interfering with your choice, your right to choice. Pakistan won't even allow you to access platforms where you can meet LGBTQ partners, people of same sexual orientation. These are popular platforms. Between September 2019 and September 2020, Tinder was downloaded 440,000 times in Pakistan, Grindr 300,000 times. You see the numbers. These platforms were an alternative to traditional matchmaking in the world's second most populous Muslim nation. In conservative countries like Iran and Pakistan, dating apps are often a medium of expression, a way to break free from age-old taboos, meet people with common preferences, have conversations that you otherwise cannot in open spaces. But expression can be immoral in some countries. In Iran, it's illegal. And these countries are more than happy to play moral police. You see, we no longer live in times where people are introduced at book clubs or photography societies. The world has moved online. Dating has moved online. The pandemic has accelerated this. In 2020, there were 11% more swipes on Tinder alone. These apps were also means of addressing loneliness and isolation for some, meeting new people outside of work, outside of home. It's on these dating apps that youth today are looking for love. 30% of American adults tried online dating in 2019. 39% of American homosexual couples met online. By the end of this year, there'll be at least 370 million active users on dating apps worldwide. Online dating is a $3.2 billion market. It's a market that some countries are unfairly tapping into and dictating terms to. And by doing so, interfering with who we date, how we date. States today are bulldozing your choice, also stepping into your bedroom. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.